Hi, I'm Ashley, and today I am joined by Leah Zinsky. Leah is a 4th grade teacher at Orange Ave Elementary and has multiple students with specialized education plans, whether that be IEPs or 504s in her classroom, and is very familiar with these processes. So I'm so grateful to have her on the podcast today. Okay, so welcome to the podcast, Leah. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we're just going to jump right in. As an educator, what is your experience with IEPs and 504s?
Okay, so I've always taught as a classroom teacher in the general ed classroom, and I've always had a handful between anywhere between 2 and 5 students in my classroom that have IEPs and 504s. But usually my school always gives me a copy of the documents prior to the first day, and then we check in and have meetings on these students throughout the school year just to see if anything needs to be updated, changed, added, anything like that.
Mm-hmm. So kind of bouncing off of that, you mentioned that the school kind of gives you these documents and stuff like that. Do you know, other than that, how the school manages them and if it's productive?
I would say that it is productive. So the school definitely, so the parents and the school are a team in a sense, right? So parents have to either request the accommodations or approve the accommodations that the team puts in place. So the team is me, the classroom teacher, either the social worker, the school psychologist, the special ed teachers, and the parents. So it's always everybody's on the same page all the time. I put the accommodations in place daily in my classroom. So for example, if I have a hearing impaired student, I wear a microphone or have them seated in the front of the room so that they have specific seating everywhere so that they can always hear me. But it's easy to keep up with the plan usually, and the parents, the school is usually always on the same page, and the document goes to me, to all the teachers in the school that see the student, and then it also goes home to the parents. Nothing is approved without permission.
And so based on just that, you mentioned that it's usually smooth sailing with the parents, easier for you. Does it make it easier for you to keep up with the plans when they're engaged in it? Just kind of how they're kind of that dynamic, having the parents know about the plans and addressing them and realizing their student needs it. Does that make it easier on you?
Yeah, I would say yeah, because it's easier to give the students what they need when everybody's a team and the parents are involved and they know what's going on too, rather than having to kind of wait to put these things in place before the meetings and get permission and stuff like that. But it's easier when the student is identified and the parents know about it, to be able to put those things in place.
And have you kind of had an experience like that where the parents are kind of not on board or just don't know about it, that you've had to kind of take it upon yourself to address?
Sometimes kids fall through the cracks here and there and things like that. So sometimes if they come to me and I notice something, I usually request to have a PPT. So then when I notice something that the student might need or that they might benefit from, I request the PPT, and then I share with the parents my data or why I think that is necessary, and then they can kind of share from their side and they can agree or disagree, and then we go from there.
Got it. And so then I guess you're a 4th grade teacher, so being that your students are so young, do you notice how do you address kind of when they need a special education plan and when they don't, and kind of just the dynamic with the other students in the class who also just might not understand to the full extent?
So it's actually, I taught 2nd grade before this, and in 2nd grade it was a lot easier, I would say, because in 2nd grade they're aware of their accommodations, but the other kids are not necessarily, so they don't pick up on things like that or think anything is different than what's going on. But in 4th grade it's a lot more noticeable. For example, some of my kids use an app called Bookshare to read on, and the other kids are reading from books or reading on Epic or something like that, and some of the 4th graders that have that don't want to do it because it makes them look different than other people. But it's an app that reads to them rather than them having to read. But to answer your question, I do notice that there are students that need an education plan sometimes. and I address it by providing intervention in the subject in my classroom, as well as tracking the data. And then our school has an SAT team, which is the student assistant team, where we hold meetings to discuss data, progress, and strategies that would best support the student. And those happen like every month. So I kind of bring the data to those about those students who are not yet identified that like may possibly need an IEP or 504, and we take that information and we bring it to the meetings, and then the team kind of discusses like where to go from there.
And so then I guess like all around, it seems like you have just a lot, like you're in charge of like kind of noticing, pointing these out, taking it, and being a part of these, a whole bunch of meetings. And you mentioned you have between like 2 and 5 students. So how is it like, does being the only educator kind of in the class affect how you handle these individual needs?
So sometimes it's difficult to handle the individual needs when it's just me and I have a lot of the kids. But I think it's really helpful to know ahead of time who has accommodations and stuff like that, and what they need ahead of time. And then I think during the day, those accommodations I already am aware of, and so are the students. And like the older they get, the more aware they are of what they need. So like again, a student that's hearing impaired or something like that, like they know that they need to be in the front and they can't hear if they can't hear. But again, like some things are things that like I can kind of just do little things here and there along the way to help them throughout the day. But then also those are the kids that I know that I would pull in a small group when other kids are working independently to like kind of get them to where they need to be. Yeah.
So then, I mean, with that, I know you said that they're way more kind of aware of their plans at this age, which is, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's a shock to me. It's a little bit surprising just because they are still like very young, and just kind of understanding these and why that they have them. But you did mention that some students might not want to use the platforms that they need to, like their accommodations to get help. So at this age, it feels like I've talked about this to other students that I've interviewed on this, and they said that there's kind of like this stigma around it. Do you like, I know you mentioned that you saw it, but how else do you kind of see it in place, if that makes sense?
Like how else I see them not wanting,
like the stigma around it, like how is that like kind of fueled in the classroom, or is it just kind of like a mental thing for them?
I think most of the time it's a mental thing for them, because the other kids are not, the other kids sometimes are jealous that they get to use other things that like, or have other resources that they don't get. But I think that like it's kind of like in their own head in a sense that they feel different, but other people are not looking at them that way. But like I said, they get pulled out of the classroom sometimes here and there, and to receive special ed services out of the classroom, and they, like the other kids are always like, oh, they went to this room. Like they're not, it's never like a necessarily a bad thing, but like everyone's just kind of aware that that's like how the classroom flows. Friends
and stuff like that. And in terms of like, I guess the classroom flow, when you just said that, at this age, they're kind of taken out of like regular lessons and brought to a separate room to get like specialized instruction if they have an IEP. Does that kind of affect like how they are in the classroom, or would you say it helps them more because it's like in their plan?
I would say it helps them more because it's in their plan, and it also is kind of like meets them at what they need, because sometimes what we're doing in the classroom might be too much, or they might not fully grasp exactly what's going on. So I feel like it kind of meets them where they are, and then when they come back, I work with the special ed teachers as well, so like they kind of know what's going on in the classroom too, so they're always able to modify things that we're doing in here to meet their needs.
So it's like, does it correspond with the class that's, and this probably doesn't matter, but does it correspond with the class that's going on, or is it just like they go whenever and still get the instruction and all of it?
So they have specific times that they go, and normally they make the schedules based on the classroom schedule. But like most of the time it aligns. If we're doing math in here, they go do math in the other room. Like 90% of the time it aligns. There's sometimes when schedules change and stuff like that, it's different, but most of the time if math is in here, that's what they're doing.
So it's never really just like a hindrance, it's always just to support students.
Yeah.
So then in terms of kind of these plans on like a more broad spectrum, I've talked to other people about it and done some research, and there's definitely advantages, but there are also a lot of challenges with putting it in place and just so much around it. Are there any changes that you would want to see district-wide, or even in the education system as a whole?
Sure. So I feel at my school that I'm really supported by the administration and by the coaches. Like we have literacy and math coaches that support us in our classrooms. So I feel really supported by them, and like they also are part of that SAT team. So like if there's a student I notice that's struggling, like they will provide me with the strategies that I can use to kind of help them in small groups or something like that. So I definitely feel supported, but the one change that I would make is there used to be, instead of coaches, there used to be interventionists, and the interventionists used to provide the support in our classroom for the students that needed, or that we wanted to identify are the students that needed a little bit extra. But we don't have the interventionist position anymore. So, and the only reason that I would change that is just because sometimes when there's 5 or 6 kids with IEPs or 504s that need help, they all sometimes have different needs. And it would be nice to kind of have somebody to help me get to those needs, because I can't get to 25 kids at once and like try to pinpoint each thing for each of them.
Yeah. So do you know why they get rid of those, the interventionists?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure because I left the district before, like when they had interventionists, and then I came back, and then when I was back they had coaches, so I'm not sure. But the coaches basically are similar to that, and they will help in that way. It's just they don't have a time to specifically be in here and work with that specific,
like individually in the classroom.
Exactly.
Because I get that is probably like a really big challenge. Again, going back to like being the only person in the room with how many 4th grade kids who are already rambunctious, already like everyone's kind of chaotic, and then you have to, even students without IEPs and 504s, I feel like they all have individualized needs just in how people learn, because people learn differently.
Right.
So just having kind of those, special education plans, but also like all the rest of your students. Definitely I find interesting and definitely a challenge.
No, that you're right. That's true too, because they're, even the kids that don't have the IEPs and 504s, you make a good point. Like sometimes it's hard to manage, like, if there's some kids who are really getting something and they're ready to move on to something, and then there's some kids who are really stuck, and there's some that don't get it at all. It's like there's a mix all the time, and it's hard sometimes to find that balance. But
yeah, and you're also like 9 years old, like you're jumping off the walls and stuff like that. Just what I've observed. I mean, being here on field day was a treat.
Yeah, you got to see them in their best form,
in action. Yeah, like that was their day. So then what I kind of want to end with, that I end all of the interviews with, is what's one thing that you wish people knew about like these plans as a whole, like in general?
I think the one thing I wish people knew as a whole was just kind of how important they are, and how that it's not necessarily putting a label on a student by giving them one, but it's just kind of giving them the supports and putting those supports in place that are going to help them and set them up to be successful. Like you were kind of saying about a stigma before and stuff like that. Like that's not what they are. It just kind of gives them the tools and supports that they need to be able to be successful in school. Yeah.
And I know like you're in elementary school, like that's your kind of expertise, I guess I would say. I don't know if you can kind of answer this. Do you think like with time and like age, like it becomes less like that, or is it just kind of rooted in the education system?
That's a good question. I don't really know necessarily too much like about the upper grades and how it looks in the upper grades. I know it looks similar, and I know like the kids that are in elementary school now, the plans that they have follow them to middle school and go with them. And I mean, I know things change on these plans constantly, like when students need things changed or need to fix things or have different accommodations, like we always hold a meeting. Parents can call one, teachers can call one at any time to add or change something. So I think that it kind of, going back to your question, like I think that it only helps in a sense, and I think that sometimes these supports are things that over time they grow out of and can go away once they've mastered things. Yeah. Sometimes they change, sometimes less is added, sometimes more is added. So it kind of just depends on the kid.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of speaks to it being an individualized education plan or just special education. But that's all I have today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.